It's only 2.5, so
which is good.
this will work out.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. If you want to see. Process and make that point.
Yeah, I figured we're in good hands. You got it. Okay. I figured you would be. It's actually it's right up on.
Oh, it's coming up.
I got this picture. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:32, at which point we'll call to order the June 13, 2025 special meeting of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency. With that, I'd ask everyone to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Just as a public service announcement for anybody who'd forgotten, tomorrow's Flag Day. Remember that. All right, let's move on then to roll call.
Chair West,
Yes.
Director Mohart,
Here.
Director Cravioto,
Here.
Director Tremblay,
Here.
Director Long is absent today.
Thank you. Moving on, agenda review.
For your consideration, we'd like to make one change to the agenda. Item 18, regular agenda item. Like the regular board meeting at 6:25.
Any objections? I guess technically then I need a motion to make that change. And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, let's move on then to public comments. Anyone wishing to address the board on matters not otherwise on today's agenda is welcome to do so now. Just please come forward, and hearing no voices and seeing no movement, we'll move on to executive officers' comments.
Just a brief discussion. We're going to bring a discussion item for your board at the next board meeting. Specifically to talk about some sort of special projects or some special sort of pieces of data. We're not going to have any recommendations on the next meeting, but it'll be discussion and maybe some ideas on how you'd like us to proceed as staff. First is sort of the question about variances. We've got a backlog of some variances. We want to kind of talk through what you'd like. We've also got some situations where there are some allocation credits. Same thing, but some options on moving forward. Looking at sort of streamlining the extraction report process, make some recommendations or some thoughts about some of those issues, and then some of the accounting completeness sort of questions. There's this backlog of information that we really like to sort of talk to you and get some ideas and thoughts on some of the approaches you'd like us to take on those items.
I'm not sure you're going to fit all of those into one board meeting, but
we'll start a discussion item and see where you'd like to go.
The question, would any of those discussion items be appropriate between now and then going before some or all committees? Would that help expedite the process? Because I don't know the extent of how much time each of those topics will take.
We can maybe have a discussion if there's a committee, we can start this conversation, but I just wanted to keep it there. There's just some backlog of information and some procedural things that are part of sort of the day-to-day work, and just wanted to bring you up to date on where those were, what we were doing on them, how big they are, and sort of get some guidance from you, as to sort of a focus or approach on some of those items.
So I would not be opposed if in your judgment you think some of those topics need to go to some committees. If your sense is no, they need to be for all of us at one time.
yeah,
I'm trying to figure out how to expedite.
there's a fiscal committee meeting Tuesday, but I didn't hear anything in there that was unique to that. Yeah. No, let's start the conversation here, and then if need be, we can
Okay, all right,
splinter them off.
all right.
That's it. All right, thank you. Board member comments. Any comments by the board before we proceed with the agenda? Right, there's one receive item on the correspondence agenda. Beyond that, items 9 through 13 are on the consent agenda unless someone has a question or a comment.
No, move consent.
Motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion's carried. We'll move on then to item number 14. Who's got this? Jeff?
There was a,
Want me to speak to this?
yes, go ahead.
Okay, so members of the board, thanks, and Jeff, thanks for putting on the agenda. After having been on this body now for 3+ years, I think Mr. Perello and I have changed places back and forth in the last 2 years. Given the volume of work that we do and I know that all of us do it, because we're conscientious about it, that we do in preparing for these meetings, not only the legislative function, but we even have a quasi judicial function today relative to this appeal. I think that consistent with what I see other regional public bodies doing, we ought to have a minimal, and I mean minimal, compensation for directors. I think it is earned, and it will, it'll meet my gas expenses coming here for meetings. But in all honesty, I think our time is valuable. I think from I hate to use the term equity, but from an equity standpoint, I think it makes sense because we all spend hours and hours doing this work, and our expenses are not even covered. This is a compensation for a regulatory body. I know we collect fees from groundwater users, and I can understand that philosophically, some of those users may say, well, wait a minute, we don't want to pay director compensation, but this is a typical aspect for a regulatory body to at least have minimal compensation for the board. The staff report indicates that the special act creating GMA doesn't authorize or prohibit the agency from compensating the directors. I will tell you that having spoken with our legal counsel, we are considered to be a water district for these purposes, specifically under Water Code 2200 or 20,200. If that's the case, and I believe it is, according to our counsel, GMA qualifies as a water district because it's a groundwater management agency directed to act for purposes of groundwater management within our boundaries. And based on that, it's my belief we are able to adopt an ordinance that would provide for director compensation subject to the limits of the water code. The water code is very specific on that, indicating that the maximum, this is under 20201, would be $100 per day. It can be increased, and assuming that it was adopted, it could then be increased in future years depending on the wishes of the board. I'm very respectful of the fact that this board has been in operation now for 40 years with no compensation to the board members, and I respect, and particularly Director Mulhart, and our chair, how many years you have put in on this. But I do think it's time that we do this to recognize the efforts that are being put forth by all the directors. So that's my pitch.
Questions or comments from the board?
So in full transparency, for all those years, United, for meetings, the regulation allows for United to compensate per their schedule up to 10 meetings that I attend in that month. If I attend more than 10 meetings, there is no additional compensation. I will tell you, over the years, there have been times where I've had more than 10 meetings a month,
Every month.
every month.
Yeah. I guess.
It's just, people don't understand the amount of time and energy dealing with the issues that are important to all of us, no matter where you sit. So in my particular case, that is part of the billing I make to United every month. Now, I don't know what compensation other agencies do for their members if they attend this meeting, but I think the concept that there should be some compensation, I think, is correct. Again, in my case, when I started this, I did not plan on doing 40 years of being at United and 30 years at the GMA, and now an additional coming up on 4 years at the GMA. But I think it is a valid question, and I think it's one that we ought to have a public discussion on.
Any other comments from the board?
I would add one thing, and that is, based on the other boards, the regional bodies that I serve on, including Metrolink and so on, you can cap this too. You can cap
Sure.
it out on 2 meetings. I would suggest $100 of 2 meetings per month cap. You know, I've got fiscal committee with the chair.
Well, the
Everybody else has-
request in the notice is simply to direct staff and council to come back with a presentation and a memo on the issue. We're not taking up the question of how much or how often at this time.
No, I fully understand. I just wouldn't want to be accused of,
Sandbagging anybody. I get it.
wouldn't want to be accused of somebody of not expressing my opinion on it while I have the chance.
Questions or comments from the public on this item?
Bert Crawler, the alternate for the M&I. As distasteful as compensation can be, I think Mr. Tremblay is right. I give him the credit for standing up and asking that question, putting it on the agenda. Serving as a member of the Oxnard Council, I receive compensation from the Oxnard Council for the council meetings. Recently, Clean Power Alliance, other agencies I do watch in the newspaper legal notices, United Water, Cayugas. It seems every time there's an opportunity to raise the rate, they do. But I think it's a mistake not to compensate the people that are here. The questions that I get from other council members serving on committees or potentially serving on committees, they work during the day. They couldn't take off in the middle of the day to come to these meetings. And they always ask, do they get compensated? So I think it's wise, and I think it'd be a smart move for you guys, not for myself or Mr. Tremblay or anybody else in favor, but for the future, I think it's a mistake not to compensate it. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you, Bert. Anyone else? I guess so with that, we will direct staff to work with council and come back at a future meeting with a memo and a recommendation. Now, moving on to item number 15. Do you want me to take this one? This is a proposal to approve an engagement letter with John Light at Light Gabler to represent the agency in its negotiations with the county concerning a labor services or personnel agreement. There is an agreement in place, has been since 1983. It's more than a little outdated, and both the changes in scope of the agency and the changes in the relationship between the agency and the county kind of necessitate bringing that agreement up to date. County council obviously can't represent the county and represent the agency in those discussions. We need a separate council. Light Gabler is one of the premier employment law firms in the state. They happen to be located in Ventura. I've been in contact with them, and this seemed pretty routine to them, and asking them to take that on. And so the request is to engage Light Gabler for that limited purpose.
Just as a note, I have no conflict of interest here or ethical conflict, but just to disclose to the board, to the public, John Light was my former law partner at Northern Corning here in Compton many years ago, but I have no conflict.
We won't hold that against them, but
Right.
that's
So
Sorry, we need to move the microphones a little closer to everyone. Thank you.
I'll use my best schoolyard voice then. Okay.
So
So I was a former law partner of John Light.
So on the topic that's being addressed. I'm in support of doing this process. Staff works hard on behalf of the GMA. And if anything, I think we're still understaffed and we're working towards that. We have a backlog of work that needs to be done. Hopefully we'll bring on a new executive officer shortly if all that works out. And so I support this process, and I would make a motion to approve the recommendation.
Before I ask for a second, let's conclude the board member comments, if any. Any public comments on this item? All right, there's a motion to authorize the engagement letter. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion's carried. We will move on then to item number 16.
You're going to give the presentation. So we have a short presentation on this topic, and Fry will be discussing that with you.
Good afternoon, Chair West, members of the board. Okay. Good. For the record, I'm Dr. Farai Kaseke, agency staff, bringing item 16 on your agenda packet here. And this is basically requesting authorization for the interim executive officer to continue temporary variances pending decisions on variance applications for operators in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins in water year 24-25. So as has been brought before your board, review and analysis of Oxnard and Pleasant Valley variance applications have been on hold pending your board's direction on COMCOD issues. At the May 25, 2022 meeting, your board authorized the executive officer to approve variances for water year 21-22 for operators with pending variance applications. For ag, this is for extractions which did not occur, surcharges in crop year 2017-2018, and for M&I and domestic operators up to extractions which did not incur surcharges in 2018. Your board additionally suspended payment of surcharges until such a time as a decision is rendered by the agency on pending variance applications. And your board authorized the executive officer to approve temporary variances for the water year 22-23 for operators with pending variance applications in those same categories, in those two same categories again for OPV. And again, at the February 28, 2024 meeting, your board authorized the interim executive officer to continue temporary variances previously issued for water year 22-23 right through till the end of 23-24. So your board has issued temporary variances for water years 21-22 until September 30, 2024. And what we're asking the board to do and recommending the board to do at the moment is to authorize the interim executive officer to continue those temporary variances issued to operators in the OPV basins for water year 24-25 for those operators who still have pending variance applications submitted to the agency. This also affects about 30 COMCODs in OPV that have not received their semi-annual extraction statement as of now. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I hate this idea. Absolutely hate it. I hated it last year, and I don't ever expect to see this again. I'll support it because the alternative is a hardship on the stakeholders, but this is our responsibility. We cannot, this has gone on way too long. Now I appreciate, Jeff, you wanting to bring this back at a future date. after reading this and giving this some thought, and it's something that I discussed with you, I discussed with Arnie, I discussed with Jeff Pratt years ago, we got to move. My suggestion is that the board form an ad hoc committee with a short duration of 1 year for the limited purpose of working with staff to expedite the administration of these variances so we never see this again. And it would be my intention to have that ad hoc meet with staff at least every 2 weeks until this process is done. Now, that's my 2 cents for the moment. Anybody else?
I agree with you, and I would also volunteer to be on that ad hoc committee if you would have me. And I'm wondering if maybe we need to, maybe this ad hoc committee will just speak directly to this, but obviously it says it's been on hold pending board's direction of COMCODE issues. I guess as a committee, we can put together hopefully some solutions to solving these issues, because I know this is creating a bottleneck that staff just doesn't really know how to move forward with. So,
my comment is the third bullet point down. Additionally, your board suspended payment for surcharges until such time as a decision is rendered by the agency. So it's been sitting in limbo, and I'm wondering if we form this ad hoc committee, they need to address how we unwind this process. I mean, it's sitting in limbo, and it'd be very easy for us to say, okay, it's all back on again, and oh, holy moly, the war will start. And I don't think that's what we want. At the same token, when you go back to 17, 18, you're going back 5, 6, 7, almost 8 years. We need to be careful that we don't come up with a forward-looking solution that is not mindful of a past, which is a liability to a lot of growers pending a decision that this agency, for a variety of reasons, complexity of it is probably the biggest one. And so I think the scope of your ad hoc committee needs to address not only what are we going to do going forward, but what are we going to do to unwind this thing looking backwards so as not to create a backlash and other problems. And I don't have the answer to that question either, but I think that that's what the tasking should be. This needs to be an all-encompassing solution. Let's look forward and get it fixed. Let's look back and make it fair. What that word fair means, I don't know, but I think that should be a tasking of this committee.
It's really difficult for me to assess when the chair is being ambivalent about issues, but I think I discerned a position this time. In all seriousness, when I read the staff report, the question that I had, it's about 10 lines down under discussion, is, all right, how long is it going to take to get, if we kick the can down the road one more time, how long is it going to take to get to this spot? I think it would be helpful to have an ad hoc committee appointed on this, and I agree with that. And Michael, thanks for stepping up and volunteering to be on it, because I think that will encourage pushing it along. As I sitting here, I don't have a real sense how long this, since I'm a relatively recent arrival to the board, I don't have a real sense on how long it would take to get this done. There wasn't anything in the staff report about it.
No, we didn't put a timeline on how to get it done. And just talking with staff and talking with the chair, it's real evident that now is the time to sort of staff pull together the information necessary for the appropriate decisions to be made by the board. And I think a committee would be a real good value to the staff in working through some of these issues.
Yeah, fully agree with that. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah.
Can you speak to maybe the scope of these applications or a number, if you can provide that off the top of your head?
Yeah, I can give you numbers off the top of my head, but I can look at. and bring it back.
Any questions or comments from the public on this item?
Jurgen Gramco. Henceforth, I'll be speaking as the president of Marathon Land. This is really more of a water land issue than it is a sod farming issue. So as many of you know, I've been part of this for many, many years and have seen the variance requests. And I would agree with postponing this. I would be very careful to invest a lot of time and energy into trying to resolve this. This is a very hot issue. I mean, very hot. And because we have the litigation going on a parallel track, and the litigation is in its phase where we're going to define what native yield is and what augmented yield is, and ultimately go to phase 2 and determine allocations. So one of the things first thing you'd have to approach is that the current ordinance is based on a base period from, working off my recollection now, but it's 2004 to 2014 or 15. And the litigation is working off of a base period that's more recent, 2011 to 2024. So what is a lot of the variances that were being requested were because tenants had failed to file their water use reports, and the landowners were coming forward and saying, well, I don't have the data because my tenant didn't, my dog ate the homework kind of thing. And I don't know how you get around that other than, for missing data, you get a minimum allocation or something. And I just feel like there's going to be a lot of controversy around this when, in fact, on the legal side, the controversy is being resolved through the legal process. So I wouldn't want to see both things going on simultaneously, because I have a feeling that, the legal process is ultimately going to solve this problem.
Except management of the basin is this agency's responsibility, not the court's responsibility. The court's got jurisdiction to assign water rights, whether or not a physical solution is appropriate, necessary, or will withstand appeal is a question. We don't need to wait till the end of that process to solve this.
Well, I don't disagree with that. It's I'm just here to tell you that the base period is a very key part of how you do this. And the base period that was used to create the ordinance is a different one than's being done in the litigation. So, worst case scenario, you spend a lot of time, energy, make new friends and a lot of different enemies, because, it's just going to switch around who's getting what. And then in the litigation, there's going to be an entirely different allocation. So I'm just trying to paint a picture.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Greg want to speak.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize him from a distance. This is a new look that I'm seeing here.
The gray hair.
Well, among other things.
No, we're used to seeing that.
Whoa.
Are you advertising for a razor, electric razor at Christmas time?
Wasn't planning on speaking today. I was trying to hide in the back room. But happy Friday to you all. Good to see everybody. Good to see everybody again. Thank you for allowing us to speak. Director, staff.
What's your name for the record?
Oh. Do I want to give you my Greg Lewis, Duda Farms? And I was going to comment, however, Mr. Gramco, I think may have swayed my comments a little bit. To answer your question, Director Cravioto, there was the scope of the variances. The variances are a function of the October 2019 ordinance that was adopted by your board, and embedded within the ordinance was a condition to apply for variances. Those variances came to light for a number of different reasons. Mr. Gramco highlights one, that during that 10-year base period, of which there were 20 reporting periods, 2 per year, records were missing. Dog ate the homework. There's some where cropping patterns have changed, and so a variance request could be sought after for a number of reasons. There were about 170 that were filed as a result of the 2019 ordinance. Couldn't tell you how many had been resolved. I can tell you that my company filed a couple, and they were resolved simply because the GMA and United's records differed, and so we achieved a resolution there. I also interfaced with some landlords who filed variance requests in March of 2020, and here we find ourselves in June of 25, and so I on the one hand, support Chair West's sentiments towards let's get this thing handled. I also support Mr. Gramco's view of, hey, let's think about how much time it may take to resolve if there's 100 remaining requests, because there is pending litigation that may not even contemplate a base period. It could be a completely different way we view allocations, if allocations even become part of a physical solution. So I think the idea here is great. Let's develop an ad hoc committee to quantify the amount of outstanding variance requests. How complicated are they? Some are administrative, purely missing records. Some are more substantive. You know what? I was farming a very low water intensive crop during that time, and I've since moved to this crop, and I think a variance request may be appropriate. I think that ad hoc committee should consist not only of those who are close to the requests and the numbers, but perhaps even members of the community who have intimate knowledge of the cropping patterns, what our neighbors are doing, and perhaps the amount of water that is required and consumed for that particular crop. Thank you. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you, Brett. Anyone else? All right, with that, there is I guess, is there then a motion to authorize the interim executive officer to approve the temporary variances for water year 24-25 for M&I and domestic operators in the OPV basin with pending variance applications up to the amount of extractions that did not incur surcharges in calendar year 2018?
Mr. Chair, do you want that motion to include authorizing the chair to form an
Yes,
ad hoc
please.
committee?
Yeah,
So I would ask that we not combine the motions. We make two separate
Okay.
motions.
that's fine.
On this particular item, I would agree, if you want to make that motion on this item. I think we need,
Okay, I'll
on the
second.
second item, we have a
Okay,
different.
I'll
way.
second the chair's motion.
All right, so there's a motion and a second. I guess all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion's carried. Also, I guess, is there a motion to authorize the formation of a variance ad hoc committee to work along the lines that we've discussed?
Let me speak to that, trying to respond to the issues that have been stated by the public. I'm willing to make a motion to create a variance committee, but I think we need to include in that motion some very clear tasks as we work our way through. And one of the tasks, I think, is to give us a scope of exactly I think if we do it sequentially, we can answer questions that are important to answer and work our way through and not set up a case where we're interfering with an existing lawsuit, but not give up our authority as an agency to manage the problem. And so I'm thinking if you set up and you say, look, the first task over this year, just to get to the end game, the first task is to give the board and the public a sense of the scope and specifics of the problem. And I'm going to leave it that nebulous. It may be how many people have a problem associated with record keeping? How many people have a problem associated with cropping pattern changes? And I think we can move our way through this ad hoc committee by knocking down the elements of a final solution. We need to know who pumped water, how much water was pumped, essentially, if there's any changes to the cropping pattern, how we deal with that issue, and what's the full scope of the impact of the new variances relative to the drawdown in the aquifer. Is it a massive increase? Is it a decrease? Is it neutral? I think those questions are fundamental to the scope of the ad hoc committee. And I think by setting up it in a series of decision-making so that we don't get bogged down in the typical meetings that we've had in the past that we've all had to sit through, where we get off on all kinds of tangents and we go nowhere at the end of 3 months. If we're going to do this, let's set it up so that it has specific interim goals or questions that need to be answered. And I think the first step of the ad hoc committee is define those questions. What are the steps we're going to go through to finally get to the end goal? Because the question, the way we've operated in the past, we set up a deadline and say 1 year from now, and 11 months into this thing, we go, now what do we do? Because we're not even close. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that we keep doing this over and over again. And I don't want to do that. If we're going to try to hit that target, we have to be mindful that there is a lawsuit going, but we as an agency have the right to manage our business. Let's do it logically, sequentially. And my motion then would be to authorize the variance, the ad hoc committee, and direct the ad hoc. What's that?
You have a comment from Jason.
Okay. Well, maybe Jason's going to shoot me down. Heck, I don't know. But my motion would be to have a ad hoc committee and assign a series of tasks to the ad hoc committee. I don't know what those tasks are as I sit here, but I think that's the first thing you need to do. And then give us briefings how what those tasks are and what the sequence is. We need to be very methodical about this if we're going to do it.
Jason, are you there? Did you have?
Please unmute Jason.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Elka. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend today's meeting in person. On this particular issue, because this item does not include as a recommended action or an identified action the formation of a new committee, I would recommend that that the motion be limited to providing direction to staff to bring this back for the formation of a committee at the next meeting.
Now, this is
just for Brown Act purposes.
This is an ad hoc. This is not a standing committee. We don't need a notice I can form, 2 directors can meet in the hall and have an ad hoc meeting. There's a motion to form the variance ad hoc. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion's carried. Let's go on to item number 17. All right.
Board, before you, we have a public hearing on an appeal of an interim executive officer's decision to deny Fox Canyon GMA water well application 0309 RN Daily Ranch LLC for consideration.
Thank you, Jim. Let me just explain the process to everyone. The way we're going to proceed on the appeal is that there'll be a presentation by the agency staff concerning the variance request or concerning the issue, and then there'll be a presentation by the applicant or the appellant in this instance. After that, we'll take testimony or presentations by anyone in favor of the appeal. Following that, by anyone opposing the appeal. Then once those are completed, the appellant will have the opportunity to rebut anything he or she has heard, and then closing comments after that by staff. or agency counsel. And once that's complete, then the board will deliberate and discuss. I would just make everybody aware, and the board members as well, if you have questions at any time for any presenter, feel free to chime in. So with that.
So that's the item. Elka, how do you want to handle the swearing in?
Need to ask everyone giving evidence in the form of comment or presentation, any form, the oath, and make sure that they swear to me.
Do you want to do that? Do you want to do that as a group, or do you want to do that individually, person by person?
Let's do that individually as they present.
Okay.
We have to get her on, because she's not on a
Acting
microphone.
Interim Executive Officer Jeff Palmer. Do you solemnly state
Oh,
that the evidence that you shall
let me interrupt for a second.
Yes.
Do we need to get her on the microphone for recording? This is a procedure.
Yep. Can you come to you're going to have to walk back and forth to the podium a couple of times.
Hello, everyone. Acting Interim Executive Officer Jeff Palmer, do you solemnly state that the evidence that you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. So thank you for the outline of the process. We do have a presentation that we'll be providing as part of the discussion. I do want to start off and then hand it over to Farai for the presentation. This is a procedural matter, we feel. I direct your attention to the last two sentences of the background in the staff report that sort of talk about that transfer and specifically the valid transfer between extraction allocation from 03H02 and 03H03 was never completed. And then we based on that application and that procedural steps, 03H02 retains the total amount of the extraction. So this, in terms of the presentation and the discussion, we see that as really a procedural sort of discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Farai, and now you need to get sworn in.
Groundwater Manager Farai Kaseke, do you solemnly state that the evidence you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Good afternoon, Chair West, members of the board. For the record, I'm Dr. Farai Kaseke, agency staff, and I'd like to just bring this to your attention. There are certain sections that may refer to the water well application number 0309 as 0307. I think that is on the board letter on the conclusions. I just want to make it known that that's the well permit application is 0309. That was an oversight on staff's side. Okay, so to kind of set the scene for this, looking at the background, FCGMA basically looks at well applications in the OPV basins. They're reviewed for compliance with the Agency Ordinance Code, Emergency Ordinance E, and the OPV Allocation Ordinance. Application number 0309 was filed by Daily Ranch in January of 2025, which is Exhibit 17A in your packet. This was basically to install a well to replace state well number 03H03. 03H03 was itself a replacement for state well number 03H02. I've abbreviated those state well numbers. Now, the valid allocation transfer from state well 03H02 to state well 03H03 was never completed. And based on that, application 0309 was denied because materials were incomplete and or did not satisfy the agency's ordinance. To fully understand this, we have to look at the history. I have up on the screen kind of like two columns that kind of summarize what's happening here. So basically, O3HO2, which we can call P50, that's a term that the appellant used, is basically a 50-acre parcel of land. And if we're looking here, it's the one that is the smaller part to the left. And then the P225 is the larger parcel. These two parcels are adjacent to each other and are owned by different entities. One, O3HO2 is owned by the Nottingham Trust, while P225 is owned by Daily Ranch. These are related, so mother and daughter. And O3HO2 started reporting to the agency in 2002 and failed in 2017. And as a result of that, there was an application for well replacement that was filed, which is permit 0272, which is an exhibit B. And that was filed by Daily Ranch. And basically what it did was it wanted to reside the well location from O3HO2 from P50 to P225. With that application, there was a letter of support from Nottingham Trust, which supported this move, and that the well would serve both parcels. Permit number 0272 was approved with certain conditions. And on this condition, there is, I call out condition number 2, which requires the operator to report groundwater extractions for both wells under the same code. This is basically to allow staff to be able to track the extractions while the transfer is in process. Daily Ranch violated this condition, reporting state well O3HO3 independent of O3HO2. And they acknowledged this, and I quote, "We apologize for this error. We reviewed the well permit and say that we were supposed to keep the same code. When we completed the Fox Canyon registration form, we left it blank instead of putting the OVP OTR code, so we ended up with a new code. As a result of that reporting error, code grant cam, which only had O3H03 was assigned 0.00 acre feet for water year 2020 to water year 2021, which is Exhibit E. Subsequent reporting after this was fixed, RANCAM basically had both wells reporting under the same code, even though O3HO2 was destroyed. It was then given the 308,267 acre feet per year, but this is because of the inclusion of O3HO2 into the code. And this basically demonstrates that the allocation resided with state well number O3HO2, and O3HO3 did not and does not have that allocation. This is a fact that the staff from RN Daily acknowledged, and I quote, "The allocation for the RN Daily Ranch is on the destroyed well 01 and 21 O3HO2 with code OVP OTR, and this is an Exhibit 17C. Now, we're going to just look at this in terms of what the agency ordinance code requirements are. Your board adopted the LPV allocation ordinance, and basically what this does is it sets a new extraction allocation system, which is based on the wellhead, and will enable the agency to march towards sustainability and compliance with SIGMA regulations. What it also does is it sets that extraction allocation based on a base period, which is from 2005 to 2014. O3HO2, which was on P50, was in operation during this period, and so it was given assigned this allocation. Now, OPV allocation ordinance also allows for transfers of allocations, and Specifically, I'm going to call out a section which is pertinent here, which says that requests for transfer or temporary assignment of extraction allocations shall be submitted jointly by the operators and owners involved and shall include the specific details of their proposal. Now, that section of the OPV allocation ordinance is also similar to a section of the agency ordinance code, section 5.35. Basically, both require that the requested transfer be submitted jointly by the parties involved and include specific details of their proposal. In addition, emergency ordinance E limits construction of new wells to replacement, backup, or standby wells that do not result in the initiation of any new increased use of groundwater. And that's in Article 4 of Emergency Ordinance E. Looking at the agency review and how we came up with the decision, Daily Ranch submitted application number 0309 to replace stable number 03H03, which is Exhibit 17A. Email communications between Council for Nottingham Trust and agency staff and Daily Ranch staff indicate all parties were aware of the need to complete an allocation transfer form, Exhibit 17G, to complete the transfer and effectuate transfer from Staple 03H02 to 03H03. Just looking for Exhibit 17G here. I can pick that up. Council for Nottingham, I can move on without that particular part. Council for Nottingham Trust represented their client was waiting for a well sharing agreement to be in place before initiating the allocation transfer. And this email basically states, and I'm going to quote from the last, I think it says, as I explained, the parties may be moving forward with a well sharing agreement and the owner of the destroyed well situated on a separate parcel from the one well where the well now sits would like to have that in place before transferring the allocation. The agency is not aware of any well sharing agreement between the parties. Neither is the agency aware of any agreement between Nottingham Trust authorizing the filing of application number 0309 or approving the transfer of allocation from State Well 03H02. In the absence of Nottingham Trust joinder in the submission of application 0309, the application was denied because it failed to satisfy the requirements of section 9.2 of the OPV allocation ordinance, which states that it has to be submitted jointly. So as it stands, the allocation is currently assigned to the original well, State Well 03H02. Permit 0309 was submitted only by Daily Ranch, and Nottingham Trust did not agree or consent to a transfer from State Well number 03H02. Application 0309 failed to satisfy the transfer requirements of both OPV allocation ordinance and the agency ordinance code. In addition, Emergency Ordinance E prohibits the issuance of any permit for construction of a groundwater extraction facility, except a replacement, backup, or standby facility, which does not allow the initiation of any new increased use of groundwater. State Well 03H03 was drilled in late 2018 after Emergency Ordinance E was adopted, and therefore did not exist during the period of the OPV allocation base period. Extractions from State Well number 03H03 would be thus a new and increased use of groundwater under Emergency Ordinance E if O3H02 is not taken into consideration. There is also a dispute between the parties involved. Counsel for Nottingham Trust represented that the client was waiting for well sharing agreement, which the FCGMA has not received such agreement. And we don't have any specific details of the proposal for the drilling of a new replacement well and delivery of water between the two parcels. I searched through the Ventura County Superior Court's dockets also shows that Noel Nottingham Daly is the mother, is in a probate dispute with the daughter, Miss Adele Poliquin. Hopefully I'm not butchering that. You can see exhibit 17H. It is unclear whether the ownership of the original well, state well 03H02, or the authority to transfer an extraction allocation is at issue in this dispute. So in summary, application number 0309 was filed by Daily Ranch only to replace state well number 03H03, which itself is a replacement of state well number 03H02. The allocation transfer from 03H02 to state well number 03H03 was never completed. And Nottingham Trust wants a well sharing agreement in place before authorizing the transfer. Absence of Nottingham Trust render authorizing Daily Ranch submit application number 0309 fails to satisfy section 9.2 of the OPV allocation ordinance. State well number 03H02 retains allocation and thus 03H03 does not have an allocation, and application 0309 fails to satisfy emergency ordinance E article 4. The parties are in a probate dispute and it is unclear whether the ownership of the original 03H02 or the authority to transfer an allocation is a dispute here. Recommendations, staff's recommendations are to conduct a hearing on Daily Ranch's appeal of the interim executive officer's denial of application number 0309, affirm the interim executive officer's denial of application number 0309, direct counsel to prepare a written decision affirming the denial of application number 0309, consistent with the board's direction, and continue this hearing until the June 25th, 2025 FCGMA board meeting, where your board can adopt a final written decision on Daily Ranch's appeal. And with that, I will take any questions.
Brian, I have a question, just so that I'm clear. I understand that both,
Chair West, do you solemnly state?
I'm asking a question. I don't get sworn. No,
Each person giving testimony.
I'm not giving testimony. I'm asking questions.
Sorry, sir.
I understand that 03 was a replacement for 0302. Has 0303 failed?
03 has failed. It failed in January of this year, I believe.
Thank you.
Was there ever a period where 02 and 03 were used during the same period of time?
No. They have never been operated at the same time. Once 03 came online, the only way that they had an allocation, the only way that the COM code could have an allocation was when 03 and H02 were put into the same COM code. And so that's how they've been operating. So technically, the allocation is still with 02. And so moving forward, the suggestion that would be there would be it's a simple case of application 0309 being submitted with authorization from the owners that have the well 02, which has the current allocation. If that's done, I think that's a simple fix to this.
It seems to me there are two separate questions here. And if they're not separate, and if I've misunderstood, please explain. But one is the well drilling permit application to replace a failed well. That has nothing to do with the allocation. If 0303 has a 0 allocation, and you want to replace that with another well that has a 0 allocation, what's the problem? We're not increasing extractions. We're not violating the agency code or emergency ordinance E. The second question is whether an allocation transfer between O2 and O3 or O9 is appropriate, but that seems to me to be a separate question that requires the joint request that you've mentioned, but I don't see why the well drilling application, it may be an empty pit. You may get to drill a well, but you can't pump it without that allocation transfer, but I'm not sure the two need to be linked.
I see your point, that simply drilling, at the same time, drilling these wells is expensive, and you're right.
It's not
it's
your
up to
problem.
them. It's not
That's
our
not
problem.
your problem.
It's not our problem. You're right in that. So if they would like to go ahead and drill without an allocation, I'm pretty sure that's something that could happen, I think.
Maybe that's something we can discuss with the applicant when the time comes. But
That's right.
So you've heard the background and the sequence of events, and again, from a procedural standpoint, we have two parcels that are owned by two different people. Yes, related, but two different people. And you have a well on one parcel that had an allocation, still has an allocation because that transfer has never occurred. And you have on the second parcel, you essentially now have a failed well and a new well that is looking to sort of use or connect legally to the original allocation and do a transfer. And so from a procedural standpoint, there's some sequence of events that would say, is there a joint use agreement? Do they both consent to, the transfer? How does that all come together in a complete application, talking about both parcels, both wells, both parties participating in either a transfer or some sort of joint use agreement?
I guess where I'm a little confused though is it seems like these parties have successfully transferred the allocation from the old COM code to the new COM code. Is that correct?
From the old COM code to the new COM code, transferring allocation.
Because it's not really about the parcel, it's about the COM code.
It's about the well, because the allocation is with the well, not the COM code. So you can shift COM codes, but the well that has allocation is still O2.
if 09 was drilled and wanted to form a COM code with O2, what would be required? What's that process involve?
That would require consent from O2.
Okay.
That would essentially be the procedural of both parties, both parcels jointly submitting an application and both agreeing to the transfer of all of it or part of it or however they wanted to do the transfer. It's really two parties and moving the allocation from one well on one parcel to another well on another parcel.
Thank you.
Just to add that, sorry.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
I guess it's still strange because I manage Fuller Falls Mutual Water Company, and I've never thought of, although we have multiple wells, I've never thought of the allocations as being specific to each well. For purposes of reporting, although the flow meters are separately reported, aren't the allocations combined on a COM code basis?
So you can combine your allocations. This is the way that the COM codes work, where you can take several different wells and put them into one account, and then you can have that allocation combined or reflecting on your extraction statement. But when it comes in terms of the actual allocation itself, it's by the well. This is what the OPV allocation ordinance did. So we'll then go back and look at each individual well and see what that allocation is to that particular well. But the COM codes basically give operators the flexibility of operating the different wells that they have within their COM code.
So if I can follow the logic correctly, My experience is that when we were forced to abandon a well because the city of Oxnard wanted to put a road through the middle of the well, and therefore they wound up having to drill for us a replacement well. That well code was shut down, canceled. We transferred what our allocation was, or our rights at the time, way back when, and we built a new well. That to me is perfectly logical, that you have to have some paperwork moving it from A to B, and there's a rule for that. I'm not sure that this problem is fundamentally grounded in that particular administrative exercise for the solution. I think that's how it's done. I think based on what you're telling me, if I've read this correctly, this is a dispute between two parties that are related, and they're tied up in a probate issue. And this is an internal fight with the family, effectively, of getting this thing done. And if I'm right, then this agency is basically trying to solve a dispute that's in front of probate court. And that's not our job. Our job is pretty simple. You own a well, it has an allocation. You want to move it to some other well, do the paperwork, show us the two parties are involved and everybody's in agreement. That's how it happens. And that's not, if I'm not hearing it right, tell me.
No, that's exactly what we're saying. According to our records, O3 still retains that allocation. If O3, HO3 wants that replacement well, they simply have to get authorization to move that allocation from O2 to the new well. So there has to be that well sharing agreement. We don't want to be brought into the middle of that. We're simply looking at what the agency records reflect, and they reflect that HO2 has that allocation.
In my time at United and at the GMA, I don't recall that we intervened in legal right or title to a particular well. And that dispute is basically a paperwork exercise. The parties have to figure out between themselves or among themselves, whatever it is, bring us the paperwork that outlines exactly what A to B to C is, or whatever combination it is, and not put us in the position to try to solve a dispute that I think is not our responsibility to resolve.
I think we're saying the same thing, in that we're just asking them for the right paperwork for us to be able to make sure that this goes through.
So if we do not, the request is, the recommendation of staff, if I read it right, is to deny. If we do not deny this and wind up doing a transfer without the paperwork correctly, we're setting a precedent for all kinds of problems, in my opinion, going forward.
You know, taking aside the familial relationship between the two property owners, if it was two disparate, separate property owners, we would be asking them to say, how do we know that the owner of the allocation on the well where the allocation sits, how do we know that both parties agree that that allocation gets to move from this location well to this location well, when it's two different property owners and two different parcels? And so, again, when I state this is a procedural thing, as you've sort of outlined and a couple of you commented on, it's really about show us that from property owner A, where the well is, where the allocation is, agrees to move that allocation to property owner B, to a new parcel, to a new well, period.
Yeah, that's what I see.
Anything else? Thank you for. Here. After you swear.
Barry Arnold, the attorney for RN Daily Ranch LLC.
You solemnly state that the evidence you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I feel a little bit put upon. Until I got here today, I'd not seen the staff report and didn't have any detailed explanation of why the staff was concluding to deny the permit to drill the well. So my presentation is going to be in kind of two sections. So let me clarify for everybody what the sequence of events were. It's been referred to as water well HO2, which was drilled on the 50-acre parcel owned by the Nottingham Trust, was drilled in basically 2002. That well failed in 2017, no longer operational. Okay. At the time in 2017, 2018, both parcels, the 225 acres and 50 acres, were being farmed jointly. The ownership is slightly different. The Daly family are the ultimate beneficiaries of both parcels. So it's a joint family, although Mrs. Daly Nottingham controls the 50 acres. My client, Adele Poliquin, is a manager of Daly Ranch on the 225 acres. Okay. The application to drill the new well, which we call HO3, was granted in 2018. At that time, the historical allocation was in the amount of 517 acre feet for the old historical well extractions. It was being recorded under a prior com code. The replacement well, the HO3, was drilled under an application to drill a replacement well for HO2, a replacement well. And that permit was granted with one condition, that the extractions under both wells be reported under the same well group, i.e. com codes. That has been done consistently since 2018. I would also mention that the ordinances in effect at the time when the new well was drilled, the GMA ordinance says that the GMA is required to give an allocation to the new well. And that allocation was given, 517 acre feet. And that new well, that HO3, was approved for drilling by Ms. Nottingham, Noelle Daly. Okay, so we know that. When you adopted your new ordinance, there was a allocation sent to Daly Ranch. And this is, I've submitted all the materials, so I'm not sure, it didn't get in this packet here, but I've given all of the evidence to the GMA. The allocation letter was sent to RN Daly Ranch, LLC, and to Adele Poliquin. The only well in existence at that time was well HO3. So assuming that your ordinance applied to the wellhead, there was only one well that the allocation upon the adoption of the new ordinance had to have been given to HO3. HO2 didn't exist. Attached to the letter is the owner of the well was stated to be RN Daly Ranch LLC, not Noelle Daly, Nottingham. The letter of the allocation even says that the old well, HO2, had been destroyed, leaving only HO3. The summary of the historical extractions was based on the HO2 well, okay, but the allocation had already been transferred to HO3. Fast forward a few more years, I want to make one other point. In 2020, the com code designation had changed from OVP OTR, which was the prior COM code for HO2. The new COM code is RND CAM, CAM. Ms. Noel Nottingham Daly approved the merger of those COM codes, leaving RND CAM as the only COM code in effect for both properties. The extractions have all been reported under that COM code. And my client is still willing to report all extractions from the 50 acres and the 225 acres under that COM code. So in our view, the allocation has already been transferred by GMA action, by the action in fact of establishing that this allocation for this 275 acres has been and always has been in place. I might also mention in the meantime, it's not that relevant, but the prior farmer on the property was Laubacher, that is now due to Farm Fresh Foods, who has been the tenant for the last year and a half on both properties. So what happened? In the mid 2024, HO3 failed. So we don't have any water coming out of HO2. We don't have any water coming to HO3. We got 275 acres with a substandard, inadequate Pleasant Valley County water meter to supply water to the property. It's not enough. Best case scenario, we can only farm about 100 acres of the 275 acres without a water well being present and available with the allocation. The family is losing massive amounts of rental income right now as we sit here because we can't get a water well drilled and pumping for the benefit. Accepting and recognizing the ordinance now establishes the new allocation for the well to be 308 acre feet per the 2019 ordinance. We're simply trying to restore the productivity of this property based upon the GMA rules and ordinances allocations and to get our life moving forward again. Why hasn't that happened? It's been stated, and there is some disagreements among the family members. It's unfortunate. It'll be resolved eventually, like most disputes, but in the meantime, we need to get this well drilled for the benefit of the family. And I would also say, just from a practical standpoint, by allowing the well to be drilled on the 225 acres, and again, this is, we now call the new proposed well HO4, okay? The application to drill was to replace HO3, which was a replacement for HO2. Why staff is suggesting we are trying to replace HO2, which failed before the 2019 ordinance, is beyond me. It's a hyper technical reading of your rules and regulations. I also want to mention very briefly, we talk about the emergency ordinance E. This is a replacement well. No additional, no new, nothing. We're not over farming. We're not going to use more allocations than are awarded to anybody. This is completely consistent with the replacement well ordinance, and I don't know honestly why we're here. You've seen me before, and I also recognize, I think we all know that eventually we're going to be going to a land-based water rights, water allocation system, not a wellhead. And I also have to, at least for the record, say I think that the Daly Ranch with their 225 acres has vested water rights and is entitled to some allocation for a water well on its own property, which, by the way, we do and acknowledge will be used in an equitable basis, an equitable sharing basis with the 50 acres. Unless the 50 acres wants to drill their own well, that's up to the owner of the 50 acres. So one other mention, this is from the staff. We part of your packet also contains an email from Kathleen Rydell when this whole subject was being discussed back in 2020, where in response to some questions of Ms. Rydell, her answer in part, I'm just going to read this verbatim. If both wells are operated under the same COM code, then no transfer of allocation is needed. We're reporting RND CAM. We're complete in compliance. We have been and are complete compliance with the conditions of that were attached to HO3, and we would follow those same conditions moving forward with HO4 if granted. So with that, unless there's any questions that you would have of me, that would conclude my presentation at this time.
Thank you, Gary. Questions from the board?
I guess, have both parties agreed to allow this additional well to be included in the COM code?
There is litigation ongoing. There has been very limited to no communication between the two sides on the subject.
So I think, as sort of, outrageous as this sounds, because it seems to me fairly clear cut, the staff's hands are sort of tied according to this OP fee allocation ordinance 9.2, where it says requests for transfers or temporary assignment of extraction allocations shall be submitted jointly by the operators and owners involved and shall include the specific details of their proposal.
Well,
how would you suggest you kind of get around that ordinance?
The cooperation of the 50-acre owner has already been sought and obtained. She approved and applied for and consented to the replacement well HO3 being drilled. This new well HO4 is a replacement of HO3, not HO2.
Mm-hmm.
So
effectively, you're saying the consent already been
it's already been given, and Ms. Daly has already also consented to the merger of the COM codes. So if it's the COM codes that drive the allocations, we're in compliance with that as well. And I might also say my client has been submitting the semi-annual groundwater extraction statement. That is a form that's produced by the GMA staff. Those forms say right on it that the allocation is for HO2 and HO3, the 308.627 acre feet. So it's like everybody seems to, staff included, seems to acknowledge that there's allocations in, or have been allocations in HO3, and we're just trying to move that to a new well on the same property that the HO3 well was drilled on. And remember, HO3 was drilled on the 225 acres. So there's no change. It's just a different hole in the ground. Right?
I think this is a little bit like arguing with DMV about, I sold a car. This is a little bit like arguing at DMV that I sold a car to party B and the DMV has no record of that sale. The problem that I think, Gary, that we see here is if staff is telling us, and if your solution is the parties have already agreed to this, then why can't you fill out the transfer forms so that the process that is outlined in the ordinance to satisfy what the ordinance says, party number 2, I don't know the names of the party, signs a document transfers it to party 3, and party 3 transfers it to a new party. The paper trail is your problem. And the problem right now, in my opinion, is, and when you say, well, there's a dispute going on, and like all disputes, it'll eventually settle, you're dumping that dispute on the top of what we have a rules that staff is saying we're not following, and those rules have been in place.
Well, Lynn, we've been operating under this for 6 years, 7 years without any issue. No one's disputed that HO3 had this allocation.
Okay, I understand what you're saying there. I understand what you're saying here. I'm just thinking out loud that I'm trying to figure out what is our solution to this problem. And the solution to the problem is sign the transfer at party for well 2 to party well 3 as outlined, what staff has outlined. If everybody's doing this and everybody's agreed to do this, do the paperwork. And then this whole problem sets a precedent for everybody else out there.
And then in the meantime, we don't get our well drilled. We can't move forward with getting our well drilled. We lose 150 acres.
Gary, stop. That problem is not this board's problem. This problem is created by 2 parties that are in a dispute. Solve that problem and everything flows out. I'm not sure that you could go to the DMV and say, hey, I've got an argument with my relatives and they won't sign the paperwork over, and so the police are arresting me for driving a stolen vehicle. Will you please solve this problem? They said, well, then do the paperwork. I'm really concerned that this agency gets sucked into all kinds of things that have in my opinion, a solution. Do the paperwork. Both parties, do the paperwork.
And my solution is let's do what's rational and let's not worry about an overemphasis of procedural technicality. And that's what this is.
The problem is, as you know well, that if we start going down and not following these procedures down the road, somebody's going to raise that issue again. Anyway, you've heard me say this. I have not made up my mind. I'm telling you, I think this is the problem.
Gary, is your assertion in the bottom of page 8 of the PowerPoint, is your assertion that staff is wrong in indicating that the application did not satisfy section 9.2 of the allocation ordinance? Is that your assertion? You're not asserting that, are you?
I'm saying that the GMA has already granted.
That's not my question. My question is, are you asserting that staff is incorrect in its position that the application was denied because it failed to satisfy the requirements of 9.2 of the OPV allocation ordinance?
I don't agree that this section applies as legitimate grounds for denying the application to drill the permit.
Then by the same logic, are you also saying that the transfer requirements of Ordinance Code 5.3.5 do not apply? In other words, that's the second basis for staff's rationale.
Which was the replacement well?
It's just up here on let's go to slide 9. Let's just keep on slide 9.
I only saw this staff report today, so I don't have as much.
I only saw this. Okay, can you take us to slide 9? Take us to slide 8 first. Okay, so for purposes of slide 8 in the very bottom bullet, it indicates that the application was denied because it failed to satisfy the requirements of section 9.2 of the OPV allocation. Are you asserting that that is an incorrect assertion?
I'm sorry, to which?
The very last one.
Oh, okay.
In the application of the joiner of Nottingham Trust, the application was denied because it failed.
Okay, and I'm trying to find 9.2, which is it says request for transfer temporary assignment of the contract shall be submitted jointly by operators in order. So I read that, okay? I'm also saying that in order for you to allow the drilling of HO3, it was incumbent upon the GMA to award an allocation. So, and by merely granting the permit to drill HO3, you by necessity issued an allocation to HO3 because you could not have drilled HO3 without an allocation. So it's already been done.
Okay, is that your basis for arguing that that assertion is incorrect?
That's correct.
All right, and let's go to slide 9. On the same grounds, last bullet, are you indicating that it is for the same reasons that the transfer requirements of Agency Ordinance Code 5.3.5 have been fulfilled?
It has been satisfied merely by the issuance of the permit to drill HO3. Your ordinance says that you were required to issue an allocation to the well when drilling the replacement well. You've done that.
Now, I understand that argument.
Okay.
My question was with respect to the ordinance. And I think you've answered it. Let me move on to this.
We're talking about two different steps of the same ordinance, right? And I'm saying
two different ordinances.
Same ordinance.
Talking about, okay, let me move on to something else. Why can't the parties submit a joint application?
I don't know. I represent Daly Ranch. I do not represent Mrs. Daly.
But you made an assertion that the 225 acres plus the 50 acres only have enough water to farm 100 acres. That's your assertion, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, if that's the case, why can't the parties come together and come to a well sharing agreement and submit a joint application?
I don't know because counsel for Ms. Daly has not responded to me for 3 months. So I don't know the reason. I don't know the rationale. I don't know.
I have any questions, right? Thanks.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay, thank you.
All right, at this time, we will invite presentations and testimony from anyone in favor of the appeal.
Shall be the truth.
Thank you. Brian Hamilton, do you solemnly state that the evidence you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Good afternoon, directors and staff. I'm Brian Hamilton. I represent what's been referred to as the Nottingham Trust. And I want to answer a few questions that have come up here today. Currently, the Nottingham Trust does not join the application. There was a representation made that the properties are currently being jointly farmed. That's no longer true. The DUDA does have a lease of what's been referred to as the P255 property. That lease does not include my client's property. Unlike when my client entered into a well sharing agreement in 2018 and agreed to the to the well permit for the new well in 2018, we no longer are commonly farming the land. And the well application that was made recently was not made to benefit my client. It was not made with my client's input. It was made despite my client's not having a lease with DUDA.
Brian, let me stop you a second.
Of course.
I called for presentations and testimony from people in support of the application. I'm not hearing that.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood that as in support of the staff recommendation. And I might have jumped ahead.
In favor of the appeal, okay? Let me ask you to defer your comments a second. Don't go anywhere. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the appeal? All right, Brian, come on back, because now we'll hear from anybody opposed to the appeal.
And I do apologize for jumping in out of order. So I don't think this board needs to concern itself with the minutia of this trust dispute. It's a family trust dispute. As you can imagine, it's complicated and convoluted. And to the director's earlier point, it's not really this board's responsibility to help solve these problems. And I apologize for staff for being put in that position, but I also thank the staff for their careful application of the ordinances and the rules to ensure that the allocation that belongs to my client isn't simply given to another party without our consent. There may be a resolution. I'm not sure. I'm not the trust attorney. I can't give this board any representations about what this resolution is or how we're going to get there. But until that happens, this allocation, we're not at a land-based allocation yet. Just like the variance issue, until we get to a judgment and an allocation, we're in the world of well-based allocations. We're under the jurisdiction of SCGMA to regulate these water rights. And having this allocation is a valuable right that we're entitled to retain. And if we're going to lose it, it needs to be with our consent. So I think the board already understands the procedural issues. I just wanted to make very clear where my client stands, that there is not actually an agreement right now. This is not a minor oversight. This is actually a hot button issue between the parties. And we appreciate staff's diligence in identifying this issue and protecting our allocation and not simply allowing this transfer to occur without our consent. And we urge the board to adopt the staff's recommendation. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Just one correction. The FCGMA does not adjudicate water rights. Allocations may be a different question, but we stay as far clear as we can of water rights. And that's one of my concerns here. Because on the one hand, while I want to find a way to get the water to this parcel, one of my concerns is in the absence of an agreement, if 04, 09, call it what you will, if that well is drilled, haven't we given that 225 acres the entire allocation and deceased the 50 acres of any water right?
That's a potential fear. I'm not sure what the intentions are to drill that well without our involvement or input. I don't have any specific understanding that Mr. Arnold is trying to actually take what allocation we would be entitled to in some water rights regime, but we have no control over how much water is pumped from their well and how much water if that allocation is now theirs and we want to drill our own well, what do we do to get that water back? What's that process? I don't think there's a process that I'm aware of. So we ask that whether we characterize this as a transfer of a water right, you cannot drill water out of the ground in this region without having an allocation from FCGMA. And that allocation for this property, at least in part, belongs to my client. And effectively, what's being asked for is the right to unilaterally take that and use it. And we don't know the course of unwinding the problem created if that happens. Any other questions? Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak in opposition to the appeal? Right. Gary, this is your opportunity for rebuttal. If you heard anything you want to rebut.
Thank you. I don't think I have anything new, but I think one easy way out is you've certainly, and when the well HO3 was drilled, you condition it among other things that their extractions were to be reported, on the same well group, which has been done. So as I've said, I think we're completely in conformity with that permit. I don't think we had any objections if you wanted to further condition this permit on an equitable sharing of the allocation between parcel 225 and parcel 50. So we acknowledge we're not here saying that the entire allocation belongs to the P25. We understand that the property was being mutually farmed, and again, up until a few months ago, it was for the most part. Condition it on a water well sharing agreement or an equitable sharing of the allocation between the two parcels, and then the parties will have to figure out how to ascertain and comply with that. That'd be my suggestion.
Back to staff. Anything further?
Once again, we consider this a procedural question, and the core procedural question is did the allocation transfer as stated by the applicant from 2 to 3? Now they want to transfer them from 3 to 4, Or were they recording under one comp code the same amount of water that was being used under 2 and 3 together, but the allocation didn't transfer, the reporting was combined in that comp code? Staff would contend that the allocation lies with the well, not with the land, and that absent a joint application or a well sharing agreement, that allocation still resides with O2.
Is that true even after the well is destroyed? So 3 was drilled to replace 2. 2 was destroyed, and 3 pumped that allocation. Does that destroyed well continue to have that allocation despite years of pumping and reporting by 3? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
So yes, the destroyed well still has that allocation until the paperwork has been submitted. And so having them report together as part of the same comp code is to enable, because people take a long time to finalize these issues, is to enable them to be able to operate while they get that paperwork in. And so that's the missing part for us, is we're still waiting for that. Daily Ranch admitted in one of the emails that the allocation resided with O2. And so we're still waiting for that, that paperwork, for that transfer to happen. If we get that paperwork, if we get that transfer, then O3 is fine. They can move on the way that they want to, but that's the part that we're still waiting for.
Do you have a current well share agreement for O3 or for the comp code in general?
We don't have a well sharing agreement. What was submitted on the when O3 was drilled was just a letter of support that they can drill that. But O2 basically said they're waiting for a well sharing agreement before they do that authorization, before they do the well transfer. And so that's the part that we haven't seen. The GMA is not aware if that well sharing agreement was put in place. It hasn't been submitted our way. So that's the missing part where we're like, we need to have this for us to move forward.
If I may, just again, I want to emphasize, my client is still willing and able to report all extractions under the current COM code and will do so. So if that is an issue, we can also resolve that issue. So I'm hearing a lot of different things that don't make a lot of sense, but I want to make sure that offer or comment was clarified.
Let me ask a question. Is the well actually recorded? Well, 2. Is there actually a recording at county that it is destroyed? Has that process?
I would like to believe so, but I'll need to go and come back and confirm that for you.
On my form, on my GMA form, it has my old well, and it has the words typed into it, destroyed. That's a registered process with the county. Gary, has that well have a registered process with the county as being destroyed?
Well, HO2 has been formally abandoned and destroyed by county process.
And there's paperwork to support that.
I've got it, and I've submitted it, I believe, to the
Okay, then
to the
why
GMA.
is
And that was done before HO3 was drilled.
okay? So the question to me, okay, thank you. You've answered that question.
But just make it clear, HO3 has not yet been formally abandoned and destroyed. It has failed. We're waiting to get our permit to drill HO4.
All right, here's where the problem then, in my opinion, that we have a procedural problem where we don't have paperwork to track when a well was abandoned. It was destroyed, but in terms of transferring that allocation, and then we now have well 3 that has failed, and we're going to eventually have to build well 4. Does the allocation that's on well 2 then have to go over to well 4 and say, look, my well has been abandoned. I want to drill a well on my property. Where do I get my allocation? And we have to go all the way over to well 4. And in that process, we find out that the paperwork is never followed to get that far. In other words, what we're doing is we have again, I go back to my DMV. We have a vehicle that's out on the road that the title is wrong because the individual that passed that car over never signed the release on the pink slip. And now that car has gone to another owner. And if you go back in time and there's an accident to that vehicle because the vehicle was blah, 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 I got to believe some attorney is going to try to go all the way back to the original owner and somehow assign some kind of responsibility. I believe that what you have here is a paperwork problem that can be solved with paperwork. I don't know the politics of the family. I do know that there's tons of families that have these kinds of problems, but I'm not sure that it's the responsibility of this agency to try to solve this paperwork problem because of a dispute in the family. And I don't think an answer that says in time it'll solve itself. It's now going to transfer to the new well, 4. And what if that fails? Are we going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 and trace that all the way back to the fact that this property had an allocation, still has an allocation, and that gives them the right to drill a new well if they decide to do that. And then how are you going to come before this board and argue 3, 4, 5 years down the road when none of us are here and try to unwind this thing? I think the solution to this problem is that agencies need to stay in their swim lane. And I think our swim lane is very clear in this process. And I'm reluctant to try to solve this problem for the probate court or the family court or whatever it happens to be. They got to solve that problem. And I am really concerned about setting a precedent that basically says we wrote these rules in good intent and it was a simple solution and it hasn't been solved. And I don't know how to solve it. That's a family issue, not my issue. Solve that issue and all the stuff flows correctly. And I am deeply concerned about this agency trying to jury rig or Band-Aid a particular ordinance to make it work. And that's what I'm sensing.
If 03 had not failed, if it continued to be viable, then that well could pump the allocation this year, next year, and beyond, as it did last year and the year before that. All that seems to me is being asked is to, since that well has failed, is to allow a new well to drill that same allocation under the same conditions, you know. To the extent that a joint application was necessary in order to transfer an allocation, I think that the paperwork that transferred or that allowed the drilling of 03 upon the failure of 02 was probably sufficient. And then the course of conduct over those 6 or 7 years that intervened of allowing 03 to pump the entirety of that allocation. And I guess since 03 still exists, if 04 was drilled and 03 and 04 together created a code, you could theoretically, 04 could pump the whole allocation and report it under 03. And you wouldn't have a transfer, you wouldn't need a transfer, but you'd have parcels with an operating well and water. So, I mean, yeah, I get the technical issue. I understand not wanting to get in the middle of the family's dispute. And I certainly don't want to do anything that even inferentially transfers a water right. But at the same time, I don't want to see the property abandoned of water and useless because of it. Particularly if we're being, overly technical about how we're interpreting this ordinance, given the history of the use of the wells and the property. Now, having said all that, I like the solution that Mr. Arnold proposed that would allow the agency to overturn the denial and to authorize the issuance of the well drilling permit, subject to submission of a fully executed well sharing agreement between the owners of those two affected parcels. That would seem to be a fairly elegant solution. It would then, allow the parties to move forward and drill that well if they could work out that well sharing agreement and get it signed and submitted.
Can we go next?
Please.
I appreciate the appellant's presentation. Gary, I appreciate your presentation. I appreciate the dilemma. Staff's call on this is accurate. Its reading of the ordinance is accurate, and it's well-founded. The reasoning that are in slides 8 and 9, I find compelling. And the applicant is failing to satisfy the requirement. It's not this board's responsibility to solve this dispute. I think Mr. Hamilton is correct. And I don't want to be in a position where this agency is, in effect, transferring the allocation of his client without their client's consent. Respectfully, Gary, with respect to your proposal that the GMA condition, you would have no objection if we wanted to condition an equitable sharing between the 225 and the 50-acre parcels. In my view, and I disagree with the chair, that's inviting GMA to involve itself in the process and in this dispute. And I don't think that's appropriate. I disagree with the chair's comments on that respectfully. The better way to solve that ultimately is to come back with a joint application. And I would encourage the parties to come to agreement and submit a joint application, because for now, my view is to deny the appeal. And one other comment, this isn't just procedural. This also involves the rights of the other landowner. And my view is if this agency were to grant the appeal, it would be prejudicial to that other landowner. So it's not just a procedural issue, but as staff is correct, at its core, it's procedural. But it also involves prejudice to the other landowner, whose counsel or representative has indicated what that prejudice might be. So I'm going to vote to deny the appeal.
Just to muddy the water here a little bit.
Why not?
Please, go for it.
I think
No pun
that,
intended.
I think that this certainly highlights some of the challenges that we faced at the GMA with the ComCode issue. To me, when I see this, I think just rationally, it seems like it is the ComCode that has the allocation, and these wells exist under the umbrella and the allocation under the umbrella of the ComCode. So to me, this seems like a backup well that would be underneath the ComCode under the existing operating agreements that exist. But that being said, I know these things are challenging, and so I think, if we could come to a solution like the chair offered, that would certainly be simpler. But I sort of see this as as a backup well drilling that is not a new use, and it's under the umbrella of the comp code.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm going to move to affirm the interim executive officer's denial of the application. And for staff recommendations, 3 and 4 following on the staff report. So 2, 3, and 4 respectively.
Understood. And so the motion is to affirm the denial. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second that.
And we'll need a roll call.
Chair West,
No.
Director Mohart,
Yes.
Director Tremblay,
Yes.
Director Pavilion,
No.
The simple expedient at this time, there not being a majority to support the application, to support the motion. The motion's denied. However, there isn't a majority to overturn it either. As much as I hate saying this, I think that means we're going to have to return to this issue when the full board is present. And unless somebody's got another alternative, I don't know how else we.
The only thing I would add is that it seems like staff has signaled that they would allow the well to move forward and they would issue the permit, although they may not transfer the allocation. Is that correct?
No, I think staff's position is that that transfer has to be executed because the allocation is with the well and not with the COMCODE. COMCODEs are basically for easy management of your water resources and your pumping. But the allocation is with each well. And that's where the problem is.
But I mean, can't you have a well with zero allocation?
If it has zero allocation,
I think the comments by Director Tremblay are correct. The last thing that he said is a different way of explaining what was, I think, what I was trying to say. And that is that there is a third party involved, and that party is against this process, and they're the owner of the property. They're the owner of property that had a well that had an allocation. My contention is they still have an allocation. They have the right to drill another well because that's the requirement. And the argument that an allocation was assigned means that you now have met all the conditions. No, it just means that you can drill a well, but you didn't meet the steps along the way. I'm restating what I've already said, and that is the paperwork has to precede the actual process, and that's where the weakness is. And I agree that we're at a stalemate, and I think the only answer is if it has to come before the full board so we get
Because there isn't a board consensus to either overturn the executive officer's decision, the executive officer's decision remains I guess the determination on the application.
I would encourage getting the paperwork done.
With that, we will move on to agenda item number 19. Who's got this one?
I think.
You got it? Yeah, I'm still flipping through my pages here.
Okay.
Oh.
18 has been.
18 was continued.
Sorry. Chairperson, members of the board. For the record, I'm Dr. Faraka Seke, agency staff, here to present item 19 on the agenda packet, which is the Las Posas Valley Policy Advisory Committee member attendance. The Las Posas Valley adjudication judgment creates two stakeholder committees, the policy and technical advisory committees, and their function is basically to obtain policy and technical recommendations from stakeholders on matters related to basin management and to ensure that decisions by Water Master are made following full consideration of diverse policy and technical views. The attendance and participation requirements are governed in the judgment. Basically, for PAC and TAC, they're both required to attend at least 75% of the regular committee meetings in a calendar year, which is different from the 1 year. And they basically have to present and represent the view of the constituency and keep the constituency informed. The PAC objectives are basically to provide water right holders with a meaningful voice and representation, and to provide input and recommendations to Water Master. I've talked about the attendance requirements, that it has to be at least 75%. And then there's also, that's for both PAC and TAC, and there's a specific provision that governs how a PAC member may be removed by Water Master following consultation with the PAC for cause where a member fails to comply with requirements for committee attendance and participation. Kind of a timeline of where we are. We have the first PAC constituency group representatives were nominated and elected sometime in October 2023. And then your board, acting as a Water Master, appointed the PAC on November 17, 2023. Calendar year 2024, the PAC had 17 regular meetings. Not all members met the 75% attendance requirement. That's shown in Exhibit 19A. And the Islas Posas Management Area Small Agriculture Representative attended about 53% of those regular meetings. On May 6th, the staff sent a PAC consultation to the PAC requesting policy recommendations on whether the Islas Posas Management Area Small Ag Representative, Mr. Waters, should continue to serve on the PAC. And they submitted their recommendations on some time back. And the PAC recommendations are basically that in the case of a PAC representative whose attendance has not met the threshold outlined in the judgment, Water Master in coordination with a PAC member shall convene a meeting of that constituency group to nominate a representative to the PAC. If the constituency group nominates the individual currently serving as a PAC representative, the Water Master shall permit them to continue serving on the PAC. And the PAC will also begin the practice of including an attendance record in meeting minutes. The PAC's recommendations are inconsistent with the judgment requirements because the judgment in section 6.6 says that failure to meet 75% of the regular committee meetings in a calendar year, then that member shall be removed. And a PAC member may also be removed by Water Master following consultation with the PAC, but that authority rests with Water Master and not with the PAC. The Islas Posas Management Area Small Ag Representative attended less than 75% of the committee meetings, and therefore they should be removed from the Policy Advisory Committee. Non-attendance prevents the representative from satisfying the judgment's participation requirements, and they do not effectively represent their constituency group. Neither do they gather the views or inform their constituency members. So in conclusion, And the staff's recommendations is basically that your board remove the East Las Posas Management Area Small Agricultural Representative from the PAC for failing to meet attendance requirements, and to notify the East Las Posas Management Area constituent group to convene a meeting and hold a vote to elect a new representative to fill the vacancy. And with that, I'll take any.
Few questions. Has anybody contacted Josh and talked to him about this issue?
I understand that the chair, PAC.
Chair West, members of the board, Rob Gruther, Vice Chair of the PAC. Yes, I spoke with Josh. Ian Pritchard, Chair of the PAC, has connected with Josh about this issue. Josh understands that his attendance was poor and cited personal issues through the year and regrets that he wasn't there as much as the rest of us, or as is expected in the judgment. Pledged that he would do better, kind of looking for a little bit of forgiveness, and wants to continue serving his constituents, but understands that the rule is pretty explicit. So that's why the PAC ultimately landed on recommendation that, you know, tried to give the constituency group an opportunity to elect somebody else if they determine somebody else can represent them better. But it may be able
They can do that at any time, can't they?
They
Or
could
annually, or?
Yeah, there's I'd have to go back and look at exactly what the language says, but effectively, I think so. I think Josh has support among his constituents, but he fully appreciates that.
Okay. Brian, another question. All right. Why are we hearing this now? Who cares? I mean, I understand the judgment says, you know, the difference between 75% and 53% is 2 meetings. Who cares? Other than a hyper-technical reading of the judgment, why are we hearing this? And I understand the judgment says it's water master shall, but it doesn't say when the water master shall. We could say, you know what? He blew it last year. Let's see what he does next year. Maybe he'll do 100% next year. Why are we hearing this?
I think from staff's perspective, that is, in my view, that's your board's call to make on that.
Understand, but answer my question. Why are we hearing this? What problem are we trying to fix? What dilemma does it create for either the PAC or the water master that Josh missed a couple more meetings than he should have? Again, this seems to me to be a hyper-technical application of the judgment that is unnecessary. I don't get it. That's why I say, why? Why are we hearing this at all?
Well, my reading of the judgment basically states that failure of a member to attend these meetings basically means that the voice of the constituency group that they're representing
That's
is not
the
being.
theory. I get all that. That's again, my question is much more practical.
So let me see if I can jump in here, because we're going to go back and forth. I believe that staff is right, that they don't have the prerogative to make these kinds of calls. This was created by the PAC. They signed on to this, and I go to PAC's recommendation, and then I go to staff's response is, and staff says PAC recommendations are inconsistent with the judgment requirements. And what PAC is trying to do is, and I'm trying to find out where are they inconsistent. And the inconsistency, I think, is you're saying, look, if we decide to vote him back in, we could do that. Is that the inconsistency? So that you can make the statement that PAC's recommendations are inconsistent with the judgment? Is that, I don't know
The
where that is.
inconsistency is that it is your board's decision ultimately to make that decision whether to have him on the PAC or not.
Okay,
Staff
so
cannot
what, so do we have the ability, does PAC, Rob, does PAC have the ability to take a mathematical formula that by missing 2 events puts you in jeopardy? does PAC think that would PAC be willing, and can they, because I don't know, and maybe it's part of the settlement, hell, I don't know, change the verbiage that says PAC will self-regulate themselves and having people to attend unless the attendance reaches a new back. I don't know. And I think that solves the issue that Gene is trying to say. Why are you making a judgment call when everything we've told and talked about today is tied to making a procedural call against the rules that people love to beat us up on if we don't follow? And this is one of those. And from my standpoint, this agency did not create this particular rule. And I turn it to you as vice chair. Is there a way you can fix this rule so that it falls more in line with what Gene is saying? Because I think there's merit to that. Or is it something that should be handed to the PAC to self-discipline themselves? I don't know. I'm okay to either one of those. Rather than putting us in the business of being the bad guy again.
Yeah, no, you don't need that. And it feels frankly like it's a big waste of time for this kind of matter to come before your board. And I don't know why it's all of a sudden come up now in May. We're 5 months into the year. Like the calculus of PAC members' attendance in calendar year 2024 could have been done on January 2nd, yet it's only coming up now. I think your board, what's clear is the judgment says, and the PAC has no discretion that I know of to pursue a different threshold than what's in the judgment. That would have to go before the court. We might make a recommendation that's more flexible, but without that discretion, the best we can do is say, yep, the judgment says 75%, and then it comes to that the GMA as water master shall remove. What it doesn't say is when. There's no timeline obligation. And so presuming that Josh wants to continue and that his constituents want him to continue, there's a reasonable chance that he would get reelected instead of going through the kind of technical round of removing him for him to be renominated and reappointed. Can we convene, the PAC's recommendation is, can we convene the constituency meeting, reaffirm his interest, and kind of put this to rest without having to have 3 rounds back and forth?
Or we simply defer this for 6 months, and 6 months from now, take a look and see what his attendance has been like. And if he's kept good on his commitment to be more diligent, then we'll just get rid of it, we'll ignore it.
I would before you respond to that, I would modify what Gene said, and that is that I would ask that you guys figure out what you think is a fair timeline. And I'm okay letting this agency be the bad guy and do the formal, you're removed. Okay. But I don't want to be the bad guy to do that unless the PAC has come to the conclusion we need to do this. And by an arbitrary 75%, it doesn't give any flexibility to you or to us. But I don't think you need a judgment to talk about what I just said. I think you could treat that as a procedural issue internally. And then you can decide, and the GMA is willing to give an extension before it has to rule on something so that it can give you guys the possibility to educate, train, or do your own thing of changing people. I think that's a total waste of this board's time. And I think it sets us up for, again, another round of what the hell is that board doing? This is not our business, frankly. Does that make sense? Is that a better solution? Are you okay with that?
I don't know what kind of latitude the PAC has, but I'm fine to.
I'm fine with your 6 months.
Defer this for 6 months, and if in that time you decide, you know what, it's gotten better, but we want more time to completely assess, fine, just tell us and we'll work that out.
Great. Can I just I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think that's staff's general recommendation. The reason why we brought it before your board
You
is
had
that
to.
staff does not have that authority
Yes.
to make that call. And so that's why we brought it for you so that you
See, I
can make.
disagree. I disagree. I think staff does. For the point that I mentioned that Rob repeated. While the judgment says that the water master shall do certain things, it doesn't say when. We can decide, particularly absent a crisis of some sort, we can decide when we want to bring the issue to the fore. When it's critical for some reason to make this determination, it doesn't have to be mechanistic, and that's what this seems like to me.
And I think your suggestion, I agree with, and I think we're talking about giving that kind of latitude and my big push is let's take it out of staff and the board's hands. This is a self-disciplinary process for your committee to function effectively so that you're not setting up yourselves and us to be at conflict when we decide that, Rob Ruther hasn't been there in 7 months. Rob, you're out of here. What the hell are you doing? I don't want to get into that fight.
I was thinking about it a little bit. I don't think that the threshold was intended so much for individual representation, but to make sure that a quorum occurs and that the meetings convene, and that you could find yourself in a circumstance where there wasn't a requirement to meet certain attendance, and a group of PAC members kind of determines, well, we can kind of derail this whole thing by not showing up, and there's no path to electing somebody new. There's good reasons to have good attendance at meetings,
Yes.
right? People are much more informed. We all appreciate that. But I think what we recognize right now in the PAC is that, it's been a lift. I mean, we have convened a lot of meetings and tackled a lot of work, and most people have attended, the vast majority of meetings trying to do good work. And let's hope that continues.
So I support Gene's suggestion of bring to us a time, and we can always roll the time. And I'm really big on putting the responsibility on the PAC to figure out how we can not be triggered by this 75% issue and give us a workaround so we can. And I think we have the workaround.
I'm smiling because this is the second time in the meeting I've disagreed with the chair. Fry was absolutely right in bringing this to the board. The section of the judgment, and to call this a prescriptive judgment is an understatement. It's even more prescriptive than some of the DMV rules, Director Mulhart. I mean, 75% is arbitrary, but that's what the judgment says. And there are so many parties out there who critique this board or allege that this board is not following the judgment that you're absolutely right to bring to the board. It's a policy decision for us to make. It's up to the board to decide what to do. And I'm sensitive to compliance with the judgment. I'm sensitive to what you have to say for how to solve it. But it actually does say when to remove, because it's 75% in a calendar year. And it doesn't say when you take the action to do so, but I think any fair reading would indicate that that's when you make the move. There's been a delay getting it to us, but it's here. Here's another way to do it. Why can't we remove the representative and the PAC promptly restore the representative?
The PAC can't do it. It has to be done by a vote of the constituency group.
Then is the PAC recommending? I thought Fry would you indicate though that then forgive me. I thought you indicated though that the PAC recommendations were inconsistent with the judgment requirements. There could be a constituency group, right?
Whether it's the small ag group, is it?
It's a small agricultural group for Islas Bosas, so we could send an email. That's what we did last time when we got them to nominate their representative. So it's a simple matter for us to send emails to each individual water right holder in that group, and then they can have their election. And whoever they represent, I'm not worried about whoever they represent. I think the PAC's recommendation, if they want Mr. Waters back on the PAC, that's up to them.
Right. They put him right back on
They put him right.
They put him right
on
back on the PAC, and we don't have to wait 6 months to do that.
We can send out that email sometime next week. As soon as we're able to send it out, we can do that. But I think the whole point was simply to take it off staff's, to make sure that staff doesn't make.
Which I agree
recommendation
with.
for-
I think that's appropriate. Okay. So where are we?
Does staff, do staff and Rob understand the directions we're trying to give?
No,
Yes.
we haven't given,
Oh,
we
no, I
haven't
don't think
given
we've
any
done it.
direction. There has to be a motion.
I make a motion that we roll this particular issue for 6 months and bring it back to us for consideration.
I'll second the motion. So.
Oh, Bert's got
Yes,
a
Bert,
question.
did you want to speak to it? Come right ahead, please.
Could you hear me? Yeah.
Please, please.
Thank you. I'm not looking to get into this fight, but I want to
Please.
share, I want to share my views. There was a pretty good crowd here today, several attorneys. The technicalities, and Chair West, I'm speaking simply as an Oxnard City Councilman and watching what happens when somebody gets an attorney, when people bring attorneys to council meetings, and all of a sudden they start nitpicking and they start finding, well, you made a mistake here, you made a mistake here. It just escalates. My view, if the people are on the volunteer or they're elected and they can serve, fantastic. If they can't, that's life. But my bigger view is all the cost, time, and money that's been spent with this adjudication, Las Posas, Oxnard, and people are not going to serve potentially and get us, being this board, into hot water because somebody is going to interpret the rules. Well, you didn't follow exactly what it said. Mr. Tremblay, if it says you got to do this, you got to do this. That's the only reason I'm speaking here right now. Don't make a mistake. Don't make a mistake. Being nice, you end up getting screwed. And it's not good when you get screwed because I appreciate what the staff is doing. And the staff ends up getting their head in the chopping block. Looking back, there are things that are coming up. And as the newest member on the board, there are things that are coming up, and I'm sure you've seen, there are things that you wonder, why weren't they taken care of years ago? I mean, I sit in the audience and I wonder that too, and I'm sure you guys all do, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I appreciate the work you're doing. It was very interesting for me listening to this today, and I hope that's a benefit.
Thanks, Bert.
Thanks, Bert.
Thanks, Bert.
If I can make one more comment. I think PAC was trying to strike a middle ground, but we also don't want to get sideways with kind of the explicit language in the judgment. So, PAC's recommendation as filed, I guess my personal recommendation would be, and based on conversations with Josh, if the cleanest approach is to remove him from the PAC, convene a constituent meeting, and if he's reelected, so be it. I think he would be accepting of that. I guess I get uncomfortable with rolling at 6 months because to Director Tremblay's comments, it's, I think the concept is clear. We're supposed to look back on a calendar attendance over a calendar year. He didn't make that. We're getting to it now in May. Let's, short of a middle ground, respecting Josh's intention to do better, I think we can also accept that, let's read the judgment as it's written and move on, and hopefully we can just do good work from this point forward.
So my issue of rolling it for 6 months was not intended to preclude you to do what you just said. Because the only option for us is to say, yep, he's in violation of it, remove him. And I'm not sure you want us doing that. If our direction is because your request is, we'll handle this at the PAC. I'm happy with that. If you say, give us some time so we can handle this at the PAC, and that's why I said the 6 months. I'm not trying to kick the can down the road. I'm trying to give PAC an opportunity to do what it wants to do without us formally being the bad guy that says, hey, you're out. Does that make sense?
Understood.
Yeah, I understand that, Lynn. The problem I have with rolling it for 6 months is it's inconsistent with the judgment.
Okay.
It just is. And I think the PAC, and this is no reflection on Josh, and people all have issues that come up, et cetera. That's fine. And I trust in the good faith of the PAC to do what it thinks is the right thing to do, which may include putting them right back on and saying, you got to make 75% of the meetings so that constituency is represented, as Farai correctly pointed out. So Lynn, I would not be in favor of a motion to roll it for 6 months. I would be in favor of doing a removal and then putting it, actually it'd be the two items under the conclusion. Remove the East Los Postos Management Small Area Representative from the PAC for failing to meet attendance requirements and notify the ELPMA constituent group to convene a meeting and hold a vote to elect a new representative to fill the vacancy, because that way we comply with the judgment.
There is a motion and a second, so let's move the motion and then take it up from there.
Is that your motion?
Did I substitute? No, I'm sorry.
No,
What do you got, Gene?
There's a motion to defer the item for 6 months and revisit it.
We need a vote on that.
We need a vote on that.
Okay, so let's have that vote.
Okay, so I guess let's do it by roll call so I don't get accused of sandbagging anybody, okay? Yes.
Yes. Yes. What is it? Yes is the correct answer. Yes, okay. Yeah.
I'm going to be a no, just because I don't really want to have this discussion in December. If you could make it to 7 months, I would be in favor of it. To review the prior calendar year. And I think maybe we have an opening there, but I'm sorry.
No.
Are there any further motions?
Okay, so we're still split on this thing?
I
Wait,
move.
Did I vote wrong?
No,
you didn't.
did fine, you did
Okay.
fine.
Can I now make what
Yes.
was formerly lamely attempted as a substitute motion
Oh, okay,
We
I
actually
apologize.
removed
I
recommended
apologize.
Actions 2 and 3
under,
under item 19.
let's see. I don't know if there were 2 and 3, but hang on a second.
Yes, that is correct.
And yes, that's what I want to do. I was looking at the conclusion of the PowerPoint. Yes, that's what I would like to do.
So is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that motion.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Let's have a roll call. Yes.
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 All right, before we adjourn to close, recess to close session, let me invite any public comment on the 3
Right.
existing litigation matters. that
Come
were
on up and
noticed
talk
for-
about 3 litigation matters.
Hearing none, we're in recess into closed session. And we will likely adjourn from closed session without having to report. We got to go downstairs anyway, in the Atlanta conference.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah. And Jason's gonna drop this.
I assume.
Yeah, whatever. He's not.
Well, you did see
So,
before.
I think I've never had this situation, but